like doesn't sort of, I mean, imagine the figure of Mirza Sadeh Shirazi in UK, in London, scarce can speak English, doesn't know what to do, etc. So the figure of the public intellectual is in fact, as Said mentioned, not only the figures like Azvini and Jamalzadeh and so forth, you can go back to Taqiyzadeh, you can go back to Mirza Khan Kermani, you can go all the way back to Mirza Sadeh Shirazi. These are public intellectuals by virtue of the fact that their character, their ideas are formed in fact on the public space. Now, let me just conclude by saying why is it that now I think even not a question of exilic or third world or even cosmopolitan intellectual is any longer useful, because the word intellectual itself is troubling. Because right now I identify the formation of the character of the intellectual in fact as the other sign of tyrants. Public intellectual and tyrants go together. You have Nasir Shah here, you have Mirza Khan Kermani. You have Reza Shah here, you have Taqi Irani. You have Muhammad Reza Shah here, you have Jalal Allah. You have Ali Khamenei here, you have Abdul Karim Surush. That is, you have public intellectuals as defenders of rights and champions of liberty, etc., standing up to the figure of the tyrant. Whereas I think what we need in this transitional point is no longer the figure of solitary sort of defender of human rights standing like I did in Times Square and saying, hey, you know, citizen, humble conception of citizen as the building block of the future democratic republic in which we need to live. Now, that is cross-cultural, cross-national. Namely, if you consider our situation here in the aftermath of 9/11 and Patriot Act and Homeland Security Act, our civil liberties here were as much in danger. Habeas corpus was thrown out of the window. I told some of my colleagues that I'm a walking definition of a terrorist, and they said, no, you're too old for that. That is, grabbed by your neck, thrown to Guantanamo Bay, all your civil liberties, notion of habeas corpus, etc. Before you know it, Cheney can order me waterboarding or whatever, and I have no rights. I've become la vida nuda, as Hamid says. This is not to gloss over the fact that I could not deliver this talk at Tehran University, as I repeatedly say. I'm very well aware of the fact that there are certain privileges that I have here that I don't have there. The only place that I would be welcome if I were to go to Iran is, I don't know, Kazakh or Iranian, which is fine. All my colleagues are very So the question is, namely, cultivation of responsible citizenship. Cultivation of responsible citizenship, which I say is our task as teachers, as scholars, as academics, and even if we were to put a quotation mark around the word intellectual, is cultivation of responsible citizenship. And since citizenship is threatened as much in post 9/11 New York as it has always been in Tehran or in Cairo or in wherever, that is where our task resides. So no longer, in fact, in any by any stretch of imagination, the celebration of public intellectual, but in fact the elimination of public intellectual. There is much that remains to be done. Right now, what preoccupies me is the transmutation of Muslim, the term Muslim, into a metaphor. Okay? I live in a city that Jewish intellectual is proverbial, and rightly so. But the idea that it can be a Muslim intellectual, it seems a contradiction in terms. A Muslim cannot be an intellectual, a Muslim cannot be a feminist, a Muslim cannot be a Marxist, a Muslim cannot be anything but a terrorist. And as I said in London, I live for the day that it can be a Muslim atheist. You follow? There is reconfiguration of what it means to be a Muslim. My colleague Hamid wrote a book, Good Muslim, Bad Muslim. Every time I see him, I say, as a bad Muslim, I tell you to be a good Muslim. So I cannot, like Tariq Ali, write a book against Islamophobia, an article against Islamophobia at the beginning of which to write, well, of course I'm an atheist, however, is a bad thing. As Mina wrote, this is like a woman writing against misogyny. You say, well, of course I'm not a woman, but, however, it's not good what you say. Or an African American say, well, I'm not really African American, however. No. I'm a bad Muslim. Okay, I've said it many times. And in fact, my believing, practicing Muslim brothers and sisters are far more tolerant of my being a bad Muslim than our brothers on the secular side. Let me just conclude by saying something about Goran's point about feminism, in a way, enabling feminism that places women's rights in the context of civil rights and does not reduce it to, well, you have to all look like Audrey Hepburn in order to have rights. Some prominent Iranian women's rights activist was recently in Cairo and didn't like that some of Irene have veils and have niqab and this and that. So, oh my God, this is the Islamic Republic is coming. Fearing the possibility of an Islamic Republic, which is a perfectly legitimate fear, doesn't mean that every time we see that Egyptians, as Muslims, cannot have a say in the revolutions, just because they are Muslims, or because they pray, or because they fast. Guaranteeing that an Islamic Republic will not happen doesn't come by going to Muslim brothers and say, would you please guarantee, do you mind explaining what is your position on my civil liberties? That's the wrong way. You demand and exact your civil liberties by forming voluntary associations. Women's rights organizations, labor unions, and student organizations. You demand and exact them. You don't beg for it. One final word about excellent choice of Mahmoud for allegories. It is impossible. Right now we're beginning to rediscover what Benjamin was doing with notion of allegory, fragmentation, as way of both having agential autonomy in matters of history, but preempting the possibility of subjection. This is Dabashi in his book on German drama. That in fact, in our allegories, whether it is in Rumi's allegories or in Saadi's allegories or any sort of this staccato stories, that they make sense, that there is no kind of epistemic consistency between one story and another story. There is no episteme. It enables and then it ends itself, goes back, which goes back also to the notion of incomplete mindedness that doesn't pretend but that you are representing anything. But that not pretending should not be by way of my writing a preface to the book, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not really representing. It has to be constitutional to the narrative. The narrative becomes allegorical itself. That is part of why my sort of stories about my childhood, etc., this carefully concocted memorial aspects, memory, becomes crucial in the writing of my most recent works that I think allegorically make sense. There are a lot of many other wonderful things that have been said and I could talk about if there were time, but let me just stop and conclude here. Thanks again, Jason, for his gracious, generous spending time of organizing this. All my dear friends and colleagues who took time to come and be with us today. Some people are very easy to be friend of and comrades of. I have made it very difficult for my friends and comrades to stay true and stay the course with me.